Hello, welcome to Autistic Chess Openings. We're covering the Scotch Gambit as white, line number 17. Okay, let's summarize today's line. Scotch Gambit on the board, and this time we're going to cover h6 again. They go h6, and we take in the middle as before. But this time they don't make the mistake of trading knights right away. They don't make the mistake of going bishop c5 right away. They do knight f6, the strongest move in the position, and we respond with knight c3. And now, the most common continuation, 49% of the time, almost half the time, is to make the mistake of trading knights at this point, which helps us. And now, if they go d6, we will transpose into a line we've already covered. If they do that, we push e5, and then if they take, we take at f7 check. But this time they don't do d6. We have a slightly different variation here. The second most common move in this position is c5, and we're going to cover that one today. So they go c5, which leaves their d pawn backwards, so it's not a great move. We're going to back up. We need to figure out how to punish this one optimally. So backing up is the route we're going to pick. And then they go d6, and they've got that backward pawn. Now, because they let our queen move out for free, we're going to castle queenside. We're going to target that d6 pawn with our bishop to f4. They bring their bishop out, preparing to castle kingside. We now castle queenside, so that we have 3 pieces on that d6 pawn now. They castle kingside, and now we take. And new players might say, oh, we're only a pawn down as black, but actually the position is much worse than that. We are way ahead at this point. And the most common continuation, 85% of the time, is to take, then we take, then 70% of the time they take, then we take. So players who go down this line tend to trade down here and think that they're only down a pawn. Now, at this point, 31% of the time they go b6. We're going to double up our rooks, and then bishop to b7, getting on that diagonal, is the most common continuation. 65% of the time they fianchetto their bishop. And now we're going to go f3, shutting down that diagonal. Knight h5 is the most common continuation, 31% of the time. They're trying to get their pieces active. They're trying to get some counterplay. They want to bring their knight into these holes, and we're going to stop them. But first, we're going to strike at that bishop there and take the 7th rank. We attack that bishop. They respond by attacking our rook. We attack their bishop again, and now their bishop comes back to e8. 57% of the time, defending the f7 pawn, which we have 2 pieces on. And then now we push g3. And we shut down any counterplay that their knight could possibly do. So now all their pieces are locked up into passive roles. And that's the end of the line. All right, let's get into the details. All right, Scotch Gambit on the board, and let's pull up my mapper here. As those of you who have been following along are familiar, this is my mapper, and it lets me map chess. And there's a lot of, I store these positions and pre-calculate them ahead of time so that we can explore this. I've got a small fleet of computers populating the scores ahead of time, and we can now explore chess and find awesome lines. All right, so it uses Stockfish 18 to a pretty good depth. Okay, so h6 right here. Again, this is a bad move. It puts us 57 points in the lead, as we can see here. So they go h6, and we take in the middle, and we're still at a 57-point lead. Now, let's catch up both sides here. h6, knight takes. Yep. Okay, so we can see knight takes d4. We covered that before. We see how bad that is. It puts us 140 points ahead. We can see bishop c5 puts us 241 points ahead because of the tactical bishop takes f7 check response. But now they're doing knight f6. Now, the likelihood of knight f6, it's not as common. It's 9%. Usually, my cutoff is 10% for common moves, but 9% is close enough, and this is an early move. And it's good to be able to punish the most common moves that come right off the Scotch Gambit. And h6 is the 3rd most common move. And we've got 65% coverage of this position. We're going to add another 9 to that, taking us up to 74% coverage here. All right. So knight f6, and it's also good because some of these lines, they end up transposing and teaching us how to play this properly. As we learn different lines, we'll find other lines that can transpose into them, and then we'll know what to do in those positions. And this Scotch Gambit here, when we go knight c3, it's very common here, if they don't trade knights, to in a number of different move orders end up with them having both knights out and d6 pushed and bishop e7 and maybe even bishop d7. Very common defensive positions by black, and it's good to know how to handle these lines optimally so that we can get a lead no matter what they do. So let's see here. So we're seeing knight f6 here. That is the top move in the position. That is their only good move. So they play this one, knight f6, as we can see on the right. And now we've got a number of possibilities. We could take it c6 or go knight c3, and I've already mapped down those, and we're going to go knight c3. And that leads us to this position here. Now, at this point, their top move is to pin our knight, bishop b4, as we can see here on the right with my mapper. At that point, we would have to take it c6 to keep our score up right there. Let's expand that for later. All right, so, but they don't do that usually. So at this point, the knight takes d4 is the dominant move 49% of the time. There's still this, if you look at the ratings, this is the 1400 average rating. At that rating, a lot of players don't realize that trading off pieces and helping us get our pieces out quickly is a bad move, and they think a queen in the middle is a bad thing, when a queen in the middle can be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on whether it can be driven around or not. It is the most powerful piece, and it has a lot of influence on the board, so we love having our queen in the middle. And it also saves us time of getting the queen out of the way, so we can castle queenside, which puts a rook on the d-file aimed at their queen in one move, which is very a common theme in the Scotch Gambit. If your opponent allows you to get your queen moved without you wasting any time doing so, or by doing a strong threat, it's usually to our advantage to then castle queenside. So knight takes d4 is the most common move. They play that, and then of course we have to take back, and that brings us to this position. So let's take a look at this. Knight takes d4 puts us 147 points ahead. We can see that this trade in the middle, the engine does not like it. They take, we take, and now we're looking at a lot better scores. Here's the 5 most common moves from this position, and we can see them here, 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 here. I've marked them all on the side here. d6 is the way to continue, and that transposes into that's the best line here. That transposes into our previous line we covered before that goes like that. All right, so let's delete that. But this time we're going to add more coverage. We're going to cover c5. So we take our coverage of this position from 31% up to 48% by adding another 17%. So they go c5, and now we can see how bad that move is. Our score goes from 127 jumping up to 260. Bad move. It puts their position, that d-pawn, really backward, and lets us dominate this file eventually. All right, so queen e5 check was good. Queen d3 is good. I followed those lines. I mapped them and explored all the different things. And we're looking for the usual 4 things we're looking for. We want top engine scores. We want trickiness. We want to minimize our branching. And we want to pull them out of book while they're already out of book. So we don't need to worry about obscurity. But we do want top engine moves, minimize branching, and trickiness. And with those qualities in mind, I explored both these top engine moves, and queen d3 looks like the better way to go to me. So we're going to do queen d3. All right. So after we do queen d3, now the most common response, 37% of the time, is to push that d-pawn up to d6. And we can already see how backward, how weak that pawn is. So they go d6. And now you can see the engine's response saying, yeah, bishop f4 dominates. We don't even need to look at the other possibilities. It's over 100 points ahead of any other contender. So bishop f4 is the way to go here. And if you look at the players as white, the majority of them are castling at this point, or the most common move is to castle at this point, not bishop f4. And they've got some other common moves here. They're dropping the ball. We're not going to do that. We're not going to. There's one way to play optimally at this point, and it's not by doing any of these others. 28% of people did it right, and that means that let's see here, 72% did not. So the majority of players playing white do not punish optimally these bad moves. We're not going to make that mistake. So we go bishop f4, putting optimal pressure on d6. All right. At this point, bishop e7 is their top engine move and the most common move, so that's what we're going to cover. Happens 57% of the time. They go bishop e7, and now we've got that sweet castle queenside and line the rook up on that backward d-pawn. So we castle queenside. Their most common continuation, 73% of the time, is their top engine move, which is to castle. And we can see that we are 300 points ahead. That's a whole piece. Material, we're only down a pawn. But the engine is like, our position's a lot better than just a pawn. So there's that pawn that we get for free. We take it d6. And now their top engine move is to take with the bishop or with the queen. They're both neck and neck, and there's some others. b6 isn't bad. But yeah, they're playing optimally at this point with these trades. They take, we take. And taking again. This is their optimal way to go, is to trade down. And we can see that here. Queen takes d6, 319 versus anything else is much worse. So they take, and then we take with our rook over here. And that gets us to this endgame here. Well, not endgame, but the queens are off the board, and 2 of the minor pieces are gone, so we're approaching the endgame. All right, so we're approaching the endgame, and we're a pawn ahead. But the engine is like, our position is way better than that. You're at least 2 pawns more than that. So at this point, knight to e8 is their top response. And if we look at how common that is, it's very rare. 1% of the time or less. So knight e8 is how they ought to respond. And if they do, knight e8, I have not mapped that. Let's expand that for later. All right, but with something that only happens 1% of the time, we don't need to prepare for that. We need to, not first anyway, we need to prepare for b6 the most. 31% of the time, they push b6 here. And protecting their c5 pawn and preparing to fianchetto their bishop, because they can see that their bishop it doesn't have a lot of squares here that, if they move it to d7, we've got this pawn push, that makes them nervous. If they go e3, we can take it. If they come out to g5, we've got f3. So they see they can't put their bishop anywhere, and so they go b6, preparing to fianchetto their bishop. We want to let them do that. We don't want to shut that down with f3 right now and discourage them from doing that. We want them to move their bishop to d7. So we are going to respond with rook at h to d1. There was a number of moves here, and I mapped all of them and looked pretty far on all of them before deciding that rook at h to d1. It actually I didn't have to look that far to see that this was the best way to continue, because all of those are top engine moves. Right here, all of these are top engine moves. However, rook at h to d1 leads to the position with the highest error rate, and we have 330 games in this position here. If we go rook at h to e1, and we can see with that much data, 330 games, we can see very clearly what is common. And if we do rook at h to e1, look at the error rate of our opponent. So if we have a whole bunch of different top engine moves, we're going to pick the one where our opponent is messing it up, and that's this one. They develop the bishop to b7, or they develop the bishop to g4. Very intuitive moves. We've always been told, develop your pieces. They didn't get to finish development, and so now they develop, and so it's a very common thing to fall into, and 85% of the time they fall into this, and they're both blunders. They need to go knight e8 at this point, attacking our rook. And if they don't do that, then h5 is better. There's a whole bunch of better moves, but they're all very counterintuitive, more advanced type moves than the person who's been playing down this line with us. So these are all subtleties, and bishop b7 and bishop g4 are the straightforward moves, and they're not very good. And that's why we like this rook at h to d1 move over the others. They get this wrong. We don't want to discourage them from getting on that diagonal until after they do so. And so the most common continuation, 65% of the time, is to jump on the diagonal. And now that they've done so, we push f3 and shut that diagonal down. They cannot touch our pawn chain that's locking down their knight and their bishop without sacrificing material. And that f3 move shuts down both. So they go bishop b7. We go f3, clearly the dominant move here to shut both of those down. And now we've got 4 common moves at this point. We're driving this all the way to the end. We've got 400 games left. Knight h5, they're looking for counterplay. They're trying to get active. So knight h5, again, another 110 point deficit move. That's another blunder. These endgames are tricky to play, and a lot of players don't know how to play them. So we're gonna take this really nice lead with this really nice position where we're a pawn up plus a really dominant position, and we're gonna very precisely nail the critical early moves in the endgame to really shut them down so bad that we're gonna be 500 points ahead. We're gonna end up winning a rook or a piece and still having a good position. So rook to d7 is what we're going to respond with. We're going to seize that 7th rank, attack that bishop. And now, 2/3 of the time, we're down to 60 games. So this is still a good enough pool to know what's likely. They're going to attack that rook with the bishop. And we're going to go to c7 and attack it again. Now, at this point, they attack our rook. We move our rook to c7. We can see how good that move is right here. So we go there. Bishop to e8 is the most common move. Happens 57% of the time. 21 times out of 37 games, they went bishop e8, trying to protect that f7 square that we're hitting with 2 pieces, and they have 2 pieces defending. They're trying to put a 3rd piece on it. But all this does is lock them down worse. Bishop to e8 is actually their top engine move, so it's actually a good move that they're spotting. But they are locked down at this point pretty bad. We're going to go g3 now. So once their bishop is locked down, their rook's locked down, now we lock down that knight. It cannot get to f5 and get some counterplay in. It tried to, but we distracted it by threatening their bishop first and then threatening it again. And finally, when they move their bishop somewhere safe so that they can get their knight to f5, we shut that hole down. Our pawn majority of 4 against 3 here that are all advanced while his are not are shutting that knight's activity down so it can't do anything. At this point, we're down to 6 games, and we're pretty much at the end of our line. But let's glance at some of these. Knight f6 and a6. Out of 6 games, we saw a6 3 times and knight f6 3 times. So I think we can count on one of these 2 moves being very likely at this point, and they're pretty simple to handle at this point. They go knight f6. Let's take a look at my map here. Knight f6. We're going to go e5 as the dominant move. We attack that knight there, driving it to where it has nowhere good to go. And now we can see the end of my map here. We have 4 moves here that I marked and just explored. I think the most intuitive here is probably knight to h7, but I'm guessing. We don't have any data here to know for sure. But if they go knight to h7, here's our final scores. We are in the 500s here. A pawn up plus a dominant position. If they go knight to h5, we're going to go rook to d6. That rook d6 move is very strong, seeing as how we can threaten their rook and then start gobbling pawns with our bishop. All right, b5, attacking our bishop there. Then we just go knight takes b5. Very simple and straightforward. That'll be our dominant move there. I'll expand that for later. And then knight to d7. At this point, rook at d takes d7. So we end up trading off 1 rook for 2 pieces. And still maintaining a dominant position. All right, and that's all the knight moves. The other possibility right here in our ending point where we push g3 is they go a6. That happened. Here, let's delete these. a6. That happened 3 times. And after they go a6, our dominant move is rook d6. That only the players playing wide only did that once. That's our dominant move there. It's clearly the winner over the others. e5 did not look nearly as good. b3 didn't either. Rook d6 is the dominant move. So after we do rook d6, I think the main strongest move they got that we need to look out for is bishop b5. If they play that, take the bishop with our knight, and when they take back, now we move our bishop to d5, both defending a2 and attacking the rook. And the engine at this point says to let the rook fall to our bishop at this point, because anywhere they try to move it, they end up with an even worse position. All right, so rook d6. Right there, and then bishop b5. How would we handle rook b8 here? So let's take a look at those. Bishop b5, here's our score here. Knight takes b5. You can see a takes b5, and then bishop to d5. We can see our final score there on the side and how good it looks. Their top move being knight f6 at that point. And then we've got their rook if we want it. Let's see here. Bishop d5. All right. Yep. They brought their bishop out to b5. What about rook b8? We'll handle that with bishop takes a6 or e5. Number of good moves there. Knight f6. Rook takes b6. b5, attacking our bishop here. Bishop d5. And a5. Oops, I missed. a5 right there. a5, we hit with a4. And that's how we handle the end of the position. I hope you liked today's line. And until next time, thank you.